Welcome to Inside Politics with Kevin Klein, beyond the headlines, beyond the spin. Straight facts, sharp analysis, and common sense conversation you won't hear anywhere else. Let's get started.
Hi, I'm Kevin Klein. Welcome to another edition of Inside Politics. I'm joined today by two of my Winnipeg Sun colleagues. We have Royce Koop, who is a professor of political science at the University of Manitoba, and Lawrence Pinsky, KC, who is a former human rights adjudicator. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining me this week. There has been a lot happening. The budget passed. All that fanfare, all the media talking about how close it was going to be. It was close. But there was some surprises during the passing of that budget that really made me sit back for a second. And one of it was the MP who has resigned from the Conservatives, will be stepping down sometime in the spring. The fact that he didn't vote, he abstained. I took that as a bad sign. As maybe something is wrong. It's not him leaving for personal reasons. Maybe he just not a part of the party anymore. Royce, how do you take that?
Uh, it's hard to know. I mean, Matt Genereux, there was a lot of kind of gossip. There's a lot of talk around Ottawa that he was going to cross the floor and that he had been pressured to resign by Pierre Poilievre, but he himself said he wasn't. And he was very adamant. Like he wasn't coerced, he wasn't pressured into staying with the party or resigning. He has very good relationships with people in that party, and he said that himself. And so I would prefer to hear it from the horse's mouth, from Genereux himself. I think he should probably explain why he abstained. It's not really a bad thing that the budget passed from a strategic perspective. I don't think an early election would have been a good thing. But if the Conservatives can say that they did overall oppose the budget, they can oppose a lot of the bad stuff in this budget without going into an election. I think that's actually a win for the party.
Yeah, but the party, but he could have voted against the budget, and the budget still would have passed, right? I mean, he would have known that. Everyone knows who's going to vote which way by the time you get into the building. I knew that when I was a PC member. So everybody knows. You know what the other parties are going to do and such. But I'm concerned that it sent the wrong message, and it sends a message to the party faithful that maybe there's another upset apple in the cart, Lawrence.
I don't see it that way. I tend to agree with Royce because at the end of the day, strategically for the party itself, this is not an optimal time to have an election. In fact, I would say for the country, it's not an optimal time to have an election. We have to bear in mind a few factors. Most big donors are maxed out already for this year. So we would have been, had the budget fallen, we would have been looking at an election in January, I suppose, because the parties need to accumulate money.
December 24th, apparently.
It wouldn't have been. It wouldn't have been that. It couldn't be that because they can't generate money. They would have had to run on the budgets that's there already because most donors have maxed out already because of the election this year.
I know that, but I think if the budget hadn't passed, the latest the election could be held was Christmas Day.
So none of that works. I'm saying It doesn't work for the parties because they can't raise the money.
Right.
Number two, I don't know that really they're not really organized. Certainly the NDP isn't, which we'll come to later, the abdication of the NDP MP. I said abdication, not abstention, for a purpose. I said that on purpose. In any event, the parties aren't ready. Strategically, it makes sense not to go to an election. He wouldn't vote against the budget because he's a conservative at the end of the day. He's not actually divorcing the party. So this is a strategic move, but there's lots of disinformation coming out of Ottawa. What's new? That's always been the case. And that still is the case. But I don't read into this as a huge rift. I know mainstream media is saying that, is really focusing on dissension that I'm not aware that it exists. It's not what I hear on the conservative street at all.
And I'm not trying to start a fire for the Conservative Party, but let me play a clip of you of an NDP member who also abstained from voting. And we'll play this clip and talk about it right afterwards.
Very quickly, Having lived in the 44th Parliament of always being accused that we're propping up the government, I couldn't live with that. Not with this budget. This budget doesn't do enough for Indigenous peoples, and I could not do that. So that's why I abstained, because we're not propping up the government.
Was offered by the government in the budget? Wasn't there something in the budget for your riding?
There were things for my riding, and that's why I had to abstain.
All right, so she's saying she did not support the budget, but she abstained because she did not support the budget. I'm sorry, guys. And it kind of goes back to the PC member or the conservative member, CPC member, that if you abstain, not voting is voting, right? Not saying anything is actually saying something. So when you don't vote, you're actually supporting that budget. And she made a point of saying she's not going to be like the NDP of old and prop up the government. My friend. That's exactly what she did.
Yeah, that's a danger facing the NDP that the Conservatives don't have to worry about right now. The NDP spent the last 3 years propping up the Liberal Party, propping up Justin Trudeau. We were told that the party would be blazing a new trail, that they would be more oppositional, they would actually oppose this government. And so if they're now using kind of procedural tricks to get out of doing so, then it raises the question, are they actually going to be doing that, or are they going to kind of spend this parliament being a lapdog to a minority liberal government, just like they did last time? So I understand the NDP doesn't want to go into an election. We should be realistic about it. But if I was an NDP supporter, I'd be very demoralized about where the party is right now. I'd want to see them showing some backbone.
Royce, I'd be super demoralized if you became an NDP supporter.
Me too.
But I mean, who can blame them? They don't have money. They don't have policy. They don't have a leader. So they're in big trouble. They will have a leader come March. Their convention, I believe, is in Winnipeg in March. They'll have a leader. The people who are running are really dogmatic socialists. And so it's going to be an interesting dynamic. I said that woman abdicated her responsibility because she could have voted no, and she should have voted no. It still would have passed. Frankly, I imagine the Conservatives would have ensured that it passed, as would the Liberals, because neither party actually wanted an election. But she should have voted no. She should have stood at her ground because, as you said, Kevin, her abstention is a vote in favor. And that's a problem. Another problem coming up for the NDP, I read an interesting piece about, if in fact, it's a really interesting chess game here, if the Liberals agree with the Premier of Alberta to create a Tidewater port out in BC, a lot of BC Liberals are saying they will lose their seats to the NDP, who will be against a pipeline. And so there's a lot of controversy within the Liberal Party and within the NDP about what will happen. It's clear the NDP will oppose a pipeline. They'll oppose any economic development. It's not clear what the Liberals will do. If they say no, then what does Alberta do? How many times do they have to be slapped in the head and kicked around by Ottawa? If they say yes, the NDP has a real strong avenue into reclaiming a number of seats in BC. It's an interesting dynamic. Yeah.
Okay, let's go back to the original discussion then. If it was if her voting or abstaining was a vote for yes, then why wasn't it that for the CPC member who did it? Like we've kind of sat there and you talked about and came up with, well, we don't think it's that, we don't think it's this. But with the NDP member, we're saying, yeah, it was voting yes, but we're not saying that for the CPC member. Now, and again, I'm not trying to start a fire or rumors, but I mean, we have to be intelligent about this and use common sense. If one party abstains and it's bad, because that means they actually support the budget. If somebody from a different party does that, is it not the same?
Well, what the difference is the strategy, at least in my view. You can say it's always bad to abstain. I don't agree with that. Sometimes it's reasonable to abstain. The NDP should be standing for their principle. A person in the NDP who says, I don't like the budget, if that's what her real feeling is, unlike Ms. May, who voted in favor of it from the Green Party, but if they really want to say, no, we're not going to do what Jagmeet Singh did, she should have politically stood on principle and said no. For the Conservatives, it's a different story for that individual MP who's leaving anyway. And the Conservatives are saying, we don't want an election right now. So there's a strategic reason for each party to do different things, in my assessment. I view it in a different way. When I say it's bad that the NDP member abstained and it's an abdication, I mean of her ethics, of what she claims to stand for. That's
Yeah,
not
and we're
conservative.
oh, sorry, Lawrence.
Okay.
We're spending all this time talking about the opposition parties. It raises the question, who's actually responsible for passing the budget? It's the government. The
Good point.
government, the Liberals got a minority government. They got a minority mandate from the Canadian people. If they want to pass a budget, if they want to pass confidence bills, then they have to write legislation that's going to be acceptable to enough members of parliament to get it passed. You know, Canadians elected this government. They didn't elect them so that they could sabotage their own government, or so they could, inject a bunch of poison pills into their legislation to provoke an election. They elected them to make it work in a minority context, and the Liberals didn't do that. I mean, all the news has indicated they didn't negotiate. They made no concessions. They would have been quite happy to have seen their budget go down in flames. And so I would focus on who has the real responsibility here. That's the Liberals.
So let
That's a
me hit
very
on a
good
couple
point.
of points. Hit on a point. First of all, we'll do the no concessions. Elizabeth May did tell the media, and she did ask our Prime Minister Mark Carney if he would uphold the Paris Accord agreement, which is almost impossible, and he agreed to do that. He stood up in the House and he agreed to do that, right? So there's a concession, and that gave her the ability to say, "I'm going to support this budget for that." I can't believe that happened, and I don't think it's going to really mean anything. But there you go. He made a concession to do that. And we'll go back to what Lawrence said. We nobody wants an election, and neither do the Conservatives. And going back to your point, Royce, that the Liberals were elected, they didn't have a majority. They should have put forward a budget that did include everybody, and they didn't. So really, we have a budget. And we're stuck with this budget, whether we like it or not, because politicians don't want to have to go back on the campaign trail. Not because it's good for Canada, because politicians don't want to go back on the campaign trail. Is that right?
I wouldn't call it that they don't want to go on the, well, unless you mean it writ large. They don't want to go because
Mhm.
it's not in their interest. It's not about laziness. It's not in their interest to go
Right.
on the
It's not in
campaign.
their interest.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I would argue it's not in Canada's interest to go to the polls at Christmas or in January. I said it would be in January if it could be. Um, but it's not in Canadian. It wouldn't be in Canada's interest to elect a Liberal government either. That would be the worst outcome possible for Canada for a variety of economic and foreign policy reasons, in my view. So I don't think it's in anyone's interest to actually do that. And I'm not sure that Mr. Carney promised to enforce the Paris Accord. I think he said he would respect. He had sort of mumbly language there, but it was enough for Ms. May, because Ms. May didn't want an election either. I thought it was an anemic promise. I didn't think it was a very strong promise. It wasn't really an undertaking,
That's
and
fair.
she sort of hung her hat on the thinnest of pegs possible,
Yeah.
in my view.
Yeah. Yeah, she just needed an excuse to vote for it.
Yeah.
You know, I think it's not so much that politicians don't want an election. It's what do we expect from this government after the last election? You know, Stephen Harper had minority governments. Justin Trudeau had minority governments. They didn't last for 4 years, but they sure as heck lasted longer than what, like 6 months from the last election. And they did that by crafting legislation on a bill by bill basis that got support from enough people to actually pass the House. Not everyone, not every party, but enough people to actually pass it. And I don't see why we shouldn't hold Mark Carney to that same standard. He only got a minority. I'm sure he doesn't like that. I'm sure he wants a majority government, but he has to work with what Canadians gave him, and they just completely failed to do so. The Canadians didn't elect the government to, become the gambling man, to bet everything on one bill and hope it passes. They elected them to make it work.
But maybe Mark Carney knew what we all know, is that politicians didn't have an appetite to go back and campaign again.
Did
Uh,
Canadians, Kevin?
I,
Did
you know,
Canadians want to go to the
I
polls?
mean, I can't say that, right? I haven't read any polls, haven't done any research on it. I agree that Canadians are tired of, going back and forth to elections. They don't like them when they happen this fast. So why all the politics then? You knew it was going to pass, just let it pass. and let's get on with the work of Canada. Because one of the things that you didn't hear during this entire budget, nothing about trade with the United States, our biggest trading partner. We didn't hear anything about that in these discussions. All we heard about is how we can make it on our own, how we're going to be able to do it by ourselves. Yet, the parliamentary budget officer disagrees with the entire budget, disagrees that we are going to be able to make it through it, disagrees that you can replace U.S. trade by going offshore. I mean, look at it this way. We have a ban on tankers going up the BC coast for oil or an LNG, right? We have that ban. But the U.S. does it. They're allowed to do it. But we ban delivering Canadian products following the same route that U.S. tankers and such are already following along the BC coast. How do we miss that? How do we miss that as a politician standing in the House with this budget? Because you just felt it wasn't the right time for an election.
Well, that's why we don't want a liberal government, because it's a ridiculous policy. Tankers come from Alaska, as you just pointed out, right down the same route, exactly with the same oil. It's a ridiculous policy. It makes absolutely no sense. And the Americans are taking advantage, as well they should in a free market, of overseas sales of all sorts of bitumen and other products. And we're stuck with enormous debt, enormous deficits, no economic growth, and the Politburo in Ottawa that's going to choose its 5 projects to re-announce every few years. It's a mindless view of how the economy works from a former central banker. But he's been doing this for the past 5 years. That's why Canadians at some point have to wake up and ask themselves, are you better off now? Are you more optimistic now for the future than you were 5 years ago when Mr. Carney became the chief unpaid economic advisor for Mr. Trudeau and now the prime minister? And if anyone says yes, I'd like to know where exactly they're living, because that's not the country I'm living in.
Yeah, we had the Pat Sajak announcement. Games for the 5 magical projects got announced, and then we heard this past week, since that announcement came out, from the projects office or whatever was created by Mark Carney, that really only one of them, might actually happen. It's all 5 of these things are not guaranteed to happen. So then why were they announced in the first place? And the concern that I have, Lawrence raised the pipeline that could go from Alberta through British Columbia. This might actually eventually fall victim to Liberal Party politics. There are a lot of Liberal politicians that are skittish about their chances of getting reelected in British Columbia, which actually is a battleground state now. Like, it's a genuinely battleground province. Good grief! What a terrible thing to have done.
No, I think you were envisioning that they become independent with Alberta.
No, the problem is I'm watching too much CNN. I gotta stop that.
Gotta stop that.
It is, in BC, you might be mistaken if you just listen to the Premier of British Columbia, think that BC is unanimously opposed to a pipeline. That's not true. Actually, there's pretty split public opinion in BC on whether or not that pipeline should be built. It's just that for the Liberal Party, the way that the votes shake out in those Liberal seats, they're concerned for their own political skin. And so we might not get that, despite that it's good for the country, despite that the federal government has the power to do this, despite that Alberta should get this, and despite that there's a lot of people in BC that actually want this. They just don't get covered in the news when it's focused on the Premier.
Well, Eby gets a lot of attention nationally on that too, right? He seems to be the champion of no pipelines. He's the champion of no tankers. Well, he sits in his office and could probably watch the U.S. ones go by every day, right? But he's talking about we can't have tankers. So Eby becomes the champion for that. But I do agree. I've seen polls where in BC, not the majority of people are against pipelines. There's people that understand it. There's people that want Canada to be successful. Eby, to me, is acting like he does not care if Canada is successful. He wants what he wants for BC. But we have to look at it at the reality, and we've heard it from the parliamentary budget secretary. We have to get our minerals and to other countries. We have to do that. But if none of these projects, and I think that the gentleman in charge of projects not only said that we won't see them come to fruition, but also said only two of them he felt were nation building projects.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, sorry, Royce, go ahead.
David Eby's problem, it's the same problem that Wab Kinew has. He's an NDP politician. He's a smart guy. He knows what's in the public interest. He knows, he knows the pipeline is a good idea, but he's the leader of a party with significant kind of activist base that is environmentalist. It's the same thing with Wab Kinew. You can only go so far in supporting these things before you start to antagonize your own base. We saw that in Manitoba, and so we're seeing things that are clearly in the public interest, clearly in the national interest, that are being opposed for parochial political reasons by politicians. It's really sorry to see it.
Royce, implicit in what you said, though, is that Mr. Kinew in Manitoba and Mr. Eby in BC actually have a different personal view, that they actually want these projects to go ahead. I don't see any evidence of that vis-a-vis Mr. Kinew. This is a man who praised Mayor-elect Mondami in New York as being a great leader, and he loves a lot of his policies, which are all socialist, economically bankrupt policies. That's what he said. Mr. Eby says much the same, and we shouldn't confuse anyone here. The federal government has the jurisdiction, without any question, for a national project to put it through. Royce, you alluded to that or said that, and that's absolutely right. So really, the responsibility falls at the Prime Minister's feet. He's not doing what has to be done. He's not moving forward with these national projects. It's smoke and mirrors, and it's at a terrific cost for all of Canada, while the United States is advancing its economic interests. If you like Trump or you don't like Trump, it doesn't really matter. Look at our economy. Look at the per capita GNP in Canada versus the US. We should be embarrassed, or worse. That's what's going on. That's the problem.
Yet we're still making Donald Trump the bad guy. We're still blaming all of our economy on Donald Trump. We're even blaming grocery prices and inflation on Donald Trump. So we're going to wrap it up here today. On our next episode, I want to talk about inflation in Canada and kind of the spin the government's putting on it, but we'll also lead right into something that you had said about Wab Kinew. And we want to talk about that as well. So thanks for this discussion. We'll catch you on the next episode of Inside Politics.
Thanks for watching Inside Politics with Kevin Klein. Please like and subscribe to this channel and visit thewinnipegsun.com for more.